Welcome to the Manders Mindset podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am so excited for today's guest. I am here with Hersh Rephun, and Hersh has achieved success in a number of niche businesses, but was tired of struggling to convey his mission to others. And we are going to chat about how he changed that trajectory.
It's great to be here, Amanda. I appreciate your having me on.
Who would you say Hersh is at the core?
I would say at the core, Hersh is compelled to be truthful about himself. And I say compelled because I think that a lot of times we don't, we may be honest at the wrong moment or deceitful at the right time, in some way to spare someone's feelings or confusion or whatever it is. So knowing how to present yourself honestly is very important. And so I would say that's kind of who I am.
Can you take us down memory lane a little bit? Tell us about your childhood, family dynamic, upbringing.
I grew up in Miami Beach, Florida. And I often describe it as kind of an idyllic upbringing in the sense that I was a happy kid. I know I was nurtured by my parents, and my dad was an attorney, but also he was an honest attorney. He had a lot of integrity. And I think both my parents having a lot of integrity set the example for me that ultimately the truth is all you have. It's like, that's what I say now, sell the truth because it's all you really have. The other stuff, if you make up a story, that's a borrowed story, right? It's not yours, it doesn't belong to you. So I think that it was transmitted to me in a way that was subtle. It wasn't something that was on a blackboard. It was just how they moved through life. I have two older sisters, and, watching them grow up and watching how they interacted with people and with my parents and our family was very interesting to me. When you're the youngest, you two things can happen. You can observe a lot, but you could also just be very into your own space. Like being the only boy, I had my own room. So I had a lot of time that I spent in my own head. I had a very vivid imagination. I had vivid dreams, which I still do, extremely vivid dreamer, writer. But still, I learned the difference between making stuff up for show and lying. Not that I didn't tell lies. I mean, I think every person does, every kid does. But I think I knew the difference. I much preferred to get on stage and perform in a play and play a character, or even dress up at home as a character and do voices and do whatever stuff I would do, than to actually tell a story that I knew was completely false to get away with something. So it always drew a distinction to me of like playing or kidding around and being, a bullshit artist, if I could say,
I get what you mean. Now, how was schooling for you? How was high school? And then school?
School was good. I think that I did get a sense of, I was small, and rather than be tough, a lot of little kids are tough because they need to prove themselves. And I was just witty, I guess, and funny. But I did feel like it was it was nice to be, I would look at my bigger friends who were very athletic, and I think it was nice. It's nice to be big and tough. And in my mind at the time, as a little kid, impervious to bullying and stuff. But I wasn't bullied a tremendous amount. And in high school, I think I was interested in being something more than whatever I was. So I think I always had a sense of I was okay, I was safe, but I wanted to achieve something else that I wasn't quite ready for yet, whatever it was. I was writing screenplays and stuff when I was 12 years old. So I think there was a little bit of restlessness on my part.
Mm. Okay. And post high school, did you go to college?
Yeah. Yeah. I was raised Orthodox Jewish. So that for me was both a little restrictive in the sense that, there were a lot of laws to follow, a lot of things you couldn't do. I went to Yeshiva College, which is a university in New York, Yeshiva University, but they had an excellent theater department, and I was in a lot of plays there. I really found my people there, theater people. And I did improv in New York City in a group. And I went to School of Visual Arts after I graduated. I graduated with a degree in speech and communications and sociology. And then I studied film at School of Visual Arts as a kind of postgraduate period. I didn't take it for a degree. I just did a year of it. And then I started working in advertising, interestingly to me, surprisingly to me, I would say.
So you didn't plan on working in advertising?
No. I thought I was writing screenplays. My reasoning was that being an Orthodox Jewish boy who wouldn't work on the Sabbath, I didn't have a tremendous career ahead of me as an actor, which is what I would probably have done otherwise. But for some reason, I think it was fear that I really just didn't want to be like, as an actor, you have to be willing to be one of thousands, right? That audition for a certain thing or take a certain, you have to have this kind of both humility and incredible confidence. And I think mine was reversed. I think I had incredible humility when it came to my personal way of interacting, but I had tremendous confidence only in the theoretical sense. I had immense confidence that I was a good actor, but I didn't want to suffer the indignity of hitting the street every day, going on auditions and not getting them. I did a little of that, but I just didn't have the passion and willingness to do that to the exclusion of everything else. If I had, I would have probably chosen that path. I did do stand-up comedy. I did stand-up comedy in New York City. Again, that's a thing that you do a lot on Friday nights. It's not for a nice Jewish boy, that type of thing. So I focused on screenwriting where I felt like, that wouldn't compromise my religious observances. And so I pursued that. When it was suggested to me to consider advertising as a career, I kind of took the advice, but I was always thinking, okay, I'm going to go to California. I'm going to work in the film business, but working in advertising in commercial production, I was able to work with a lot of directors. I was like an agent for commercial directors. So I was able to meet a lot of very interesting filmmaking people and represent a lot of very cool directors for commercials. So it was kind of an interesting niche. It was, again, like, would I rather be in the mailroom at CAA or would I rather be representing, we represented the Coen brothers, Jodie Foster, who else? Some big name directors that did commercials occasionally. And then a lot of really wonderful directors that did commercials as their career. And it was a fascinating world.
And now, how long did you do that for?
Yeah, I did that for about 10 years. I did get some movies produced during that time. So I was hired to write a few movies. The screenplays I wrote were a little off the beaten path, so they would get optioned but not made. And then the producers would hire me to write something else that was more formulaic and low budgets. But it was really interesting to get those opportunities and pursue those opportunities while working. a regular job. But again, I thought eventually I'll do something else. I'll do something else. I'll either be a screenwriter or it'll be an entree into acting again, or I'll do stand-up comedy. And I was always doing these things like in some way. So it wasn't like I didn't write or didn't do comedy. I just didn't do them exclusively or make a living exclusively at them. I made a living representing commercial directors and then eventually starting a PR firm representing commercial directors as their publicist, not as their sales agent, and that was unique. Nobody was really doing that at the time.
Now, when did you make this transition and switch to being a holistic brand therapist?
That was, if you look at what I did for commercial directors and later visual effects artists, composers, editors, I was doing that for them. I was shaping their personal brand because artists can have a particularly difficult time expressing who they are, what they're about, how they're different from other, they write, even writers. But I didn't call it holistic brand therapy at the time. I was just doing PR, but I really was doing much more work on their brand than I was just promoting them to magazines. So COVID was a turning point, but I was also a creative director for sneaker brands because a very close friend of mine, it was a sneaker retailer, had stores in LA called Sporty LA. And I formed a niche boutique marketing firm with him called Propeller 5 that was very successful until COVID. Everything stopped. And so everybody kind of hunkered down to see what they wanted to do. And we didn't really want to keep doing the same thing again. As you can probably tell, I like to change things up. So I started podcasting. And as I was interviewing people and learning about them, I realized I should be working one-on-one with entrepreneurs, founders, creators, interesting people, even executives who wanted to pivot and do something different and help them shape their personal brands in this world where we have so much opportunity to present ourselves, but also a lot of guru kind of atmosphere around entrepreneurship where it's like, do this and you'll grow your income 10x this, and all of these best practices, quote unquote, that may have worked for the people who are doing it, but it's a lot of BS. So I felt like for the people who were a little frustrated about wanting to really step into their identity and have it work for them and earn their thought leadership and get better opportunities to work with the clients they want to work with, that I had something unique to offer in terms of their brand and their storytelling, their offers, and so forth.
Now, did you previously see yourself doing something like this?
Well, like I say, I kind of was doing it without knowing what it was called. And I was frustrated as a publicist that the publishing industry was changing. There were fewer magazines in print. There was a lot of stuff online. As that business changed and I was doing now creative direction for consumer brands, I was frustrated that I wasn't really having a huge impact on people. I was having a huge impact for a corporation, a sneaker corporation or something like that. And so I think that spurred me on to create this brand firm, this podcast, this business of holistic brand transformation, because I felt like I'm not just talking to people about their job. I'm not just talking to them about their product or even their brand. It really is their life. It's their life. It's everything that they value. It's their IP. Your personal brand is your IP. And so to me, holistic brand therapy and transformations felt much more apt for what I was doing. And if they didn't really care about their brand and they didn't really care, I love ChatGPT. It's great. Like everybody else likes to use it for stuff. But when it comes to talking about yourself and creating a language around yourself and who you are and what's important to you, that stuff's, if it's too important to trust to Google to tell you who you are, we're supposed to tell Google who we are. Google's not supposed to tell us who we are. So my attitude was, let's figure out who you are. Let's tell the world who you are in the language that suits you best, that is most true to you, and then tell ChatGPT how to learn that language. But don't ask it to tell you who you are, because it'll just make up all kinds of shit. It's not going to, it not only pulls stuff from the internet that it finds, it makes up stuff. It's sometimes a bad robot, it's a little naughty sometimes. Like I'll say to it, can you create an outline for this kind of story or whatever? And they'll give me these quotes that I know I didn't say or my client didn't say. And I'll be like, don't make stuff up. Stop making stuff up. And Chat will be like, okay, I won't tell any more lies.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's true. Now, one of your biggest philosophy is know yourself before you brand yourself.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
I think that a lot of times we are trying to please the audience, which I know a lot about from doing stand-up and from being a writer. Some of us just trying to please the audience. So you want to be whatever they want you to be. And in business, especially if we need to make money, which we do, we want to succeed. We feel like, well, okay, it's going to require some compromise. We're going to have to be this or we're going to have to be that. Or they tell us to talk like this. And we ignore some of the things that are important to us in the process. And so I think that we don't take the proper time to get to know what we really want, what really matters to us. And it's not that it's so hard to find out. It's just a lot of people skip that step. They think that their values are like, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Like, that's not how values work, because what happens is you cross that bridge and then, here you are on the bridge. That's not the best time to decide your strategy about how you want to cross bridges, is when you're standing on them,
So you'd suggest figuring out their values.
Yeah. And what makes you happy, what's really fulfilling to you. I think going a little deeper, Amanda, it's that I think I spent a lot of time clinging to ideas about myself that I thought I knew myself. And it was only when I started to meditate and I started to do some more of that stuff that took some pressure off of me, that I was able to just let myself evolve a little bit. Like, you're so busy delivering stuff and you're so busy trying to achieve things that you sometimes forget why you started doing it in the first place. And I do think that I had ideas in my head that were ingrained from a very early age that were just misperceptions. And I don't know any other way to address that than to just challenge them. So if you challenge your values, challenge your intentions, challenge your desires, you might discover that there are different things that you didn't realize you wanted or stood for.
Now, how deep does branding go?
Oh, I think it goes really deep. I think that if you think about what it means, right? A brand, when people would brand cattle, it's a declaration of ownership, right? So I think it goes really deep, because if you want a connection, everybody talks about authenticity. They talk about, oh, it has to be authentic, as opposed to what? As opposed to just being full of shit. That would be the alternative to authenticity. And you're just choosing between the two. Authenticity means people want to have a relationship with a product or with an author or with a collaborator or a service provider. They want to have something they can count on. And so brand, when it comes to personal brands, for sure, goes really deep. And I think that's why I like it, because there's no limit to how deep it can go. Doesn't mean that your brand, if your brand is you're the plumbing guy and that's your brand, that everything about you has to do with plumbing. More likely it's that the values that you have as a person may influence how you behave as a plumber, but that is pretty deep. Whereas if you sell light bulbs, the values system and all that stuff are probably not quite so important, but it still matters, right? Do you sell broken light bulbs or you only sell good light bulbs? You pack them using more expensive packaging so that they don't break in transit, or you don't really care, So those things are pretty deep. I mean, those things, let's put it this way. I think they're as deep as a friendship. So if you think friendship is important and it's deep, probably branding is too.
That makes sense. It's as deep as friendship. I'm very into analogies or comparisons like that.
Yeah.
That resonates with me. There can be very different layers to the friendship, just like there can be different layers to the branding.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What would be your biggest tip for entrepreneurs struggling with their branding?
The biggest tip would be bring a little humor to it. In other words, humor, and there's a whole chapter in my book about humor and when to use it for business. But I don't mean just humor like externally using humor in your marketing. I mean, bring a sense of humor to the situation. Like, life is hard, under even the best circumstances. So if you're struggling as an entrepreneur, it makes sense to have a little bit of a sense of humor about it. I think the reason I click with entrepreneurs, and I never thought I would, like I always thought entrepreneurs were about money. Entrepreneurs by and large aren't about money. They're about creating something, and they're taking a risk, and it's often money that they're risking, but they risk other things too, to do that thing. If you're risking things of value to do something of value, give yourself a little break and allow yourself to laugh at yourself and at the sometimes random or fickle nature of life, and pull back a little bit, because on some level, what you're doing is not the end of the world. It probably isn't. And the end of the world is probably something you can neither stop nor really worry about. Worry about the things you can influence. And if that is the area of your greatest concern, the end of the world, and you want to really work on that, well, then you're going to need a sense of humor too.
Interesting. Humor. That makes sense, though, whatever the situation is, because life is hard. As you know, like I mentioned, it's hard enough. And I think there's so much healing in laughter and humor, and I'm sure you noticed that in your stand-up comedy.
Yeah, and I think that was what drew me most to comedy, was its healing power. Not the power to be a smartass. Like, even as a kid, I think I felt bad if I told a joke or did something that hurt somebody's feelings. Even a bully, even when I would make fun of a bully, I felt bad a little bit, because I knew that, and it's true today, although some of the bullies that exist today, it would be very hard to feel bad for. But I would say that every hostile act comes from some kind of pain and fear. Nobody is hostile if they're not afraid. And so when a bully was doing something, like just threatening me, or it wasn't anything terrible, like I said, but still they're making you afraid, or they're trying to make you afraid. And so if I disarm them with humor by revealing them to be afraid and be small, they all of a sudden became so small. It doesn't matter how big a person is. It's that David and Goliath moment, you may not hit them with a rock, but you're hitting them with something more powerful. And that reduction in their size that takes place is really like, takes all the wind out of them. I did have a kid pick on like a bullet. He was little like me. So I think he was just struggling with his own sense of his own insecurities. And he challenged me in some way. And I didn't use humor to deflate him, but I stood my ground against him and I called his bluff, and he broke down crying, and he was never a bully again in that way. And it was very startling and transformative to me to see someone who went from total aggression and anger to total vulnerability.
That makes a lot of sense, like being able to laugh at something or find humor in something. The world is serious and life is hard, even as you said. And like, I'm sure that brought so much joy, like to you being like doing the comedy,
And I think it was subtle in that you get up on stage and you tell jokes or you do bits or whatever it is, and people laugh. It's not like, hi, I'm here to cure you, right? I'm not laying hands on the audience and like curing oh, I feel so much better now. We don't even know what transpired. I went up on the stage. I brought them in on the joke. Even if we're making fun, even if there's people, Don Rickles, the comedian who was famous for making fun of people, he was a very warm and funny person. And the whole joke was that we were all worthy of being laughed at. We all were going to be made fun of. Someone was going to make fun of us eventually. Someone was going to kick our ass eventually. And so it was a very comforting kind of joking where you're comfortable enough to make fun versus being mean, Like I have a friend that we bust each other's chops constantly. And it's just because the love is so deep and strong that there's no way you could ever hurt that person's on purpose, right? So they know that anything that you would say that would be making fun of them would be in jest. And so therefore you're able to say the most heinous thing, because even if it's not foul or something, but you're able to act angry or insult them in some way, but it's so totally performative and funny that you just enjoy that. It's a thrill, to do that. So it's fun.
Yeah. How would you say entrepreneurs could use humor without taking away their credibility or their expertise?
That's a really great question to ask, Amanda, because that is a little bit of a tightrope walk. The simple answer is don't be a clown. And what I mean by that is when someone walks into a room, they bring whatever authority they have. And the type of humor they may use is not really the point. Because, for example, let's say someone's a real creative person and they're very eccentric and they're very funny and they are goofy, or they wear funny clothes, they dress funny, they wear shorts. Let's just say they always wear shorts and flip-flops, and that's their thing. That's fine. That's who they are, and that's their brand, But when I say don't be a clown, I mean, don't make yourself a joke, right? So they're wearing the shorts and they're telling jokes, or they're being funny, or they're, just growing their hair however they wild, whatever it is, because that makes them comfortable. And so that's their comfort level. Think of like Robin Williams as a comedian, but imagine if Robin Williams were an inventor or an executive somewhere, or a entrepreneur, right? Let's just say he is an entrepreneur. You would never consider him a clown, right? Now, someone like Jim Carrey struggled with being taken seriously, and Jerry Lewis, because their whole persona was being a clown, but they're not clowns. Jim Carrey is not a clown. He's an artist. And I guarantee when he went into meetings to talk about money and talk about other things, he wasn't making faces. If he goes to buy a piece of art, he's not turning around and making fart faces who they are as people. That's part of entertainment. So same with an entrepreneur. If they have a very funny way of talking, or they like to make jokes, or they appreciate humor, it's not the same as not taking their business seriously. And so when I say don't be a clown, it means the part of you that you mean to exert authority with and establish thought leadership with is not the same muscle with which you just make jokes, because that is tricky. And you don't want people to think that you don't take yourself seriously or your work seriously.
Now, would you say there's anything an entrepreneur should not have as a part of their personal brand?
I would say that negativity and hurtfulness is just not good in a brand. So I subscribe to the notion of positronics. Positronics isn't a word that I made up. It's a word that Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer, made up. It's just an idea of do no harm, really. It's the idea that you shouldn't program anything to do any harm. In his case, he's talking about robots. It actually is a very kind of prescient idea if you think about AI and stuff. But it's the same thing in business. It doesn't make sense to me that you would have hatred as part of your brand, and that's a big problem for a lot of men, because they think that force and power are useful, right? And that reducing other people is important, and that winning means that somebody lost. And winning doesn't mean that somebody lost. There is no equation that demands that somebody lose in order for somebody to win. That is a fallacy. That isn't real. That doesn't mean that in sports, in the Super Bowl, that both teams win. It means that as a human being, as a brand, the owner of the team that won that Super Bowl ring. That doesn't mean that the owner of the other team or the players on the other teams are losers. They lost that game. That doesn't mean they're losers. So if you make a deal, the person you make the deal with certainly should not be the loser, right? And there is a certain class of business person and a certain class of leader that thinks that the person they make the deal with has to lose in order for them to win. And I don't subscribe to that. And I don't think that brand is a healthy brand in the end. That's my take on it.
That makes sense. Now, I'm curious, would you say there's anything different for spiritual entrepreneurs that they don't want to have as a part of their brand?
Oh, well, while I do work with a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs, and I like having those client relationships with spiritual entrepreneurs, what I would do in their case as a brand therapist or as a brand transformer is I would see what energy they're wanting to put out and honor that. But it's very unlikely that they're wanting to exert negative energy, right? I've never had a spiritual entrepreneur come to me and say, it's my mission to destroy the spirit of certain kinds of people. They may want to transform the spirit of certain kinds of people, but they don't necessarily want to be destructive. But I would say that in terms of their energy, their persona, if I wanted to work with them, it would probably be because they have some positive impact that they want to have. So it's unlikely that I would suggest that they limit the scope of their persona beyond to the point where it constrains them. And a good example would be, let's say they believe in a coach that has a tough love kind of approach and just tells it like it is and doesn't sugarcoat it. And if you don't like it, then you probably shouldn't work with that person. Or if you're afraid of looking yourself in the mirror, you probably shouldn't work with a coach that makes you do that. So I wouldn't tell those coaches, don't tone it down. I would say in general, you have to kind of be who you are, because you are trying to help people and you're trying to serve a certain type of person. And it may be a person who has a hard time at first with that. And maybe you could calibrate your message so that they understand where it comes from. You could tell your story. Maybe there's something in your story in your childhood that really explains why you do this. That stuff is helpful, but I wouldn't tell them, don't be tough, be nice, or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, is there, in terms of branding and in terms of entrepreneurs, do you think entrepreneurs should keep, I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this, like any side of their personal life, should that not be a part of the brand?
Oh, yeah. I don't think that branding is an open book. I don't think that we have to insert every part of ourselves into our personal brand just because it's our personal brand. I think people's personal lives don't have to be subject to scrutiny just because they are a brand. I think that the rule of thumb that I use is, if it pertains to the service that you offer, then number one, that should relate to your core values. So don't be a hypocrite in that sense, but don't be publishing religious books and then be a thief or dishonest, right? Don't be a clown and hate children. It's like those kinds of things. But if it doesn't pertain to you, you don't have to offer your opinion about it either. I'll tell clients, they'll say, oh, there's this issue. There's an issue that's very important to them personally, but their brand doesn't trade in that area of conversation. Nobody cares what you think about that in that case. Your brand doesn't need to have an opinion about everything. And that would be foolish to wade into a conversation. But if it is a conversation that is about your area of expertise and your area of interest, it'd be very hard to sit it out. That's your thing, And some brands, consumer brands, do that really well. Patagonia, is a great example. They're a very environmentally conscious brand, and so they've entered that conversation from the beginning in a way that seemed, to be consistent. So if your brand is about, nature, it would make sense that you care about the environment and that would be appropriate. But it doesn't mean that your views on, marriage, let's say, are relevant. That's not what your brand is necessarily. So that's your business.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, if somebody was feeling stuck in their brand evolution, what would you say they should ask themselves?
I would suggest that they ask themselves where they want to be and why. And consider whether the resistance that they're meeting, the stuckness that they're facing, is because of some external factor that is in their way that they need to move or combat, or whether they are actually not seeing something about where they really want to be. In other words, are they stuck because they're facing challenges and they have to get around those challenges and they have to wrap their head around solutions, which some of the solutions may be mindset stuff. Some of the solutions may be internal, right? It's not all external, but is it that they're facing blocks that are not indicative of what their mission should be? Just they're facing those blocks, or is there something about it that is not the right goal for them? And they have to really examine those goals. And that's why I say know yourself, right? They have to examine those goals and say, do I really, really want this? I have in the book, there's a chapter called The Breakthrough is in Your Head, Not the Wall, right? Because a lot of us bang our heads against the wall over and over. And maybe it is what we want and it's just hard. Well, that's okay. But maybe it's not what we really want. And I don't think I had asked myself that for a long time, because I would struggle with certain things and I would be like, okay, well, I have all this anger or distaste for certain things that I feel I'm being forced to do, but maybe the things that I think I want are not the things that I want. And so it's different from saying you should give up, right, on what you want because you're never going to get it. Because a lot of people will tell you that. Oh, you shouldn't want to be you shouldn't keep trying to be an actor because it's never going to happen, or you're not good enough or whatever. No one ever told me I wasn't a good enough actor. No one ever told me I wasn't a good enough comedian. Although I will say with comedy, I eventually really worked on it a lot harder than I worked on acting. But it wasn't people discouraging me that made me shift. It was saying to myself, well, if I'm not getting where I would want to be with it, is there a reason that, is it really what I want? Or maybe I'm not getting it because I don't really want it. And I would have to examine that honestly, and only I would know, right? Only you would know whether this is what you want. So no one can tell you. There's no reason, logic, whatever, but you have to dig there and be like, am I at least open to the idea that maybe I don't want? Like, am I so married to that idea that I won't even consider it? You know how that can be, that kind of stubbornness of don't even mention it. Don't even bring it up. Someone will say, oh, have you thought about doing this? And you'd be like, don't even, I hate when don't bring it up. Well, it's not the other person who should bring it up. You should bring it up. Do I really want this? So,
Do I really want this? Wow. That makes so much sense. Even with society, I feel like so many people, like whether it's a job, education, they want this thing because maybe their parents and it's like said something. It doesn't have to be a deeply rooted thing. It could be one small thing. And it's like, you don't actually want that, or the life that's going to come with XYZ,
yeah.
even the people that say they want this thing and then they try so hard and then it's sabotage because they didn't really want it.
Or they get it and they knew going in that those things were true, right? That there were things about it that they weren't going to like. There were sacrifices that they were going to make that they are pretending they're not going to make. And they're thinking that they're ignoring certain things. They're telling themselves little white lies. And then when they get what they want, they realize that they did have to do this thing or that thing, or it was going to come with this or that. Fame is like that. Fame is one of those where people become famous and then they become very depressed. And we don't understand why. If we're not famous, we don't understand what that is. But they thought that it was, but they also romanticized it. And then when they got right down to it, it sucked. It doesn't mean they don't want the money. It doesn't mean they don't like being recognized and celebrated. It just means they just maybe wanted a normal life and they thought it looked great to be doing all these things.
Yeah, that's so true. A lot of people have experienced multiple aha moments in their life. I'm curious if you've experienced a really big one where a lot in your life shifted.
Well, that's a hard one because there are those moments that are really aha moments that shift everything. And then there are aha moments that we don't really know what they shift, you know? Like, I'll tell you one. I'll share one that's recent that felt like a really big aha moment. It didn't change my life, but it may have changed me. So I was on this marketer's cruise, which is a work cruise, which I love because, I love being on the ocean. I love being in tropical areas. Growing up in Miami, it was like a thing that I did with my family. So I have a lot of sentimental attachment to it. But anyway, I was on one and one of my colleagues was doing readings, like an energy healing session. And her name is Jen Takagi. I'll give her credit because this was like a transformative thing. And, she was asking something that I'd like to fix, and it had to do with business, something I'd like to fix with my brand or my business. And she was getting into this question of what could be a blocker that I have that had to do with sales. It had to do with a lot of people who are entrepreneurs hate doing sales. They hate closing clients or doing business. And I was one of those people. And I've always tried to figure out what is it about that exchange? And there are plenty of reasons I figured out over time that are legit. But she said, do you have a fear of abandonment? And I thought, that's weird. I don't recall having a fear of abandonment. It doesn't make sense. And she said, yeah, it has something to do with your mother. And my mother didn't abandon me. And again, it didn't really make sense. And she said, well, it could be it. And this might make sense in terms of sales, because if you lose the sale, you're being abandoned. So it's not necessarily the money. You may think it's the money, but you're actually afraid that they're not going to like you if you ask for too much money or you end the relationship because they can't pay you, which I never had thought. And she said, well, it could be while your mother was pregnant with you. Was there any issue of abandonment around the pregnancy or something like that? As it happens, this occurred to me. Her twin brother was getting married around the time that my mother was pregnant with me. And his marriage ended up causing a very big rift between him and his sister and his mother, with whom he was very close with both of them, kind of inseparable, especially when you think of a twin. And so a twin getting married can be very traumatic, right? So that was traumatic for my mother in this case. She was pregnant with me at the time. So when she was pregnant with me, it would definitely be safe to say that she was feeling abandoned by her brother in that case, And so the idea of that kind of made sense to me. Really was an epiphany in the sense that, if you can put a name on something, if you can figure something out, you could probably solve the problem. So whether it was right or wrong, or whether it's accurate or not, is really beside the point, because at that moment I thought, oh, that's why I have this kind of fear of. Now, it's not necessarily a fear of closing a deal or enrolling a client, but it puts an immense amount of pressure on relationships, on business relationships, right? Because I don't have that in my personal relationships, fear of abandonment, but I might have some of it. I might be afraid to have arguments with people or be non-confrontational. So that's something. So this whole thing, and I realized I took a lot of time to kind of telling that,
No.
but I did find that I was very relieved after that because I felt like, oh, now I know why I am very afraid about these business relationships and why I'm afraid to displease clients. So I think that what made me different in terms of how I went about these things. It wasn't a thing where I was like, oh, I'm going to change my entire business model. Now I'm going to change my life plan. It wasn't anything like that, but it was an opening nonetheless into self-discovery and solving issues that are dogging me.
That's so fascinating. A lot of people talk about how feelings and thoughts that the mother has while she's pregnant can affect the child. But wow. Then it's interesting to me about the fear of abandonment showing up and somebody not booking or coaching with you. Like, it relates a lot to me, but it's like mind blown. I'm like, oh my God. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't think that it would show up, but it makes so much sense that it does.
Yeah.
You'd think it would show up more so personally or in.
Yeah. You think it, yeah, but it probably does. I mean, if you think about it, it has to do with the stand-up comedy. Because I used to think, oh, it's odd that I do stand-up comedy. There's nothing wrong with me, right? Like, that is what I thought. But having those issues, even if they're inherited versus as a result of something that happened to you, like literally to you, that's interesting. Because it does say a lot. It does explain, oh, why was I very hungry for attention? Why was I, why did I even want to be a comedian and get the applause and the adoration and the approval? Right. So I think it explained a lot.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me, Hersh. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Amanda. It's been great. It's a wonderful platform you have, a really great opportunity both for us as people talking and listeners as people kind of being able to think about themselves and see perhaps themselves. So it was really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yeah.
So he's got a podcast called On Purpose, and he ends it with 2 segments. And
Oh, nice.
With those 2 segments. First segment is the many sides to us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each. What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Adorable.
What is 1 word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Fantastic.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Disarming.
What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you as?
Idiot.
What is 1 word you're trying to embody right now?
Honesty.
Second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
If you're going to do something, do it right.
Why is that the best advice?
I got that advice from my father, and I didn't realize until I got older how many things it applied to. It makes sense because if you're struggling with something, we were talking earlier about entrepreneurs getting stuck, you can ask yourself, are you doing it right? Are you giving it the proper attention? And it just applies to everything. It applies to jobs you do for people, applies to relationships you're involved in with people. It applies to advice that I give my kids, and we don't always succeed at it. And it can be a process. So it doesn't mean it's not about being a perfectionist. It's about, do it right. Take pride in what you're doing, regardless of why you're doing it. A good example is you do somebody a favor, right? And so it's maybe a work favor and you're not getting paid and, you're doing a lot of time, but you're going to do it right. You're going to do that job as if you were getting the full amount that you always get paid, because that's part of your integrity and part of what you bring to it. So it's good advice.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
The most important thing is that people should like you.
Why is that the worst?
That was my grandmother. Didn't say it to me. She said it to my father. And by the way, it might have been the best advice that she gave him. Because here's a kid that's escaping the Holocaust to come to America and with his parents and his siblings and survive. And in that context, I don't know that it's bad advice, but I think I took it to mean what we were just talking about, that everybody needs to like me, and I don't think that's what she meant. I don't think she meant please everybody and all that stuff. And because she didn't say it to me, and I was 4 when she passed away, I never got to ask her about it. But I think that I took that the wrong way. Oh, people like me. I'm liked. I am approved of. That's so important. And so I think of that as bad advice, even if it was the way I took it.
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
Approval, I would say.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
He loved his kids unconditionally, and he loved the world purposefully.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
Well, don't be an asshole, I think would be the law. Like, I was trying to think of that in ways that would be more like officious, do no harm or don't hurt anyone, like we've talked about. But I think, because people will say we have a no asshole policy here. We don't have our company, or I have a no asshole policy when it comes to clients. I think if there were a law, you just don't be an asshole. I think a lot of things in the world would be different. It would show the assholes that the rest of the world frowns on that kind of behavior, which is something that a lot of assholes don't realize.
I like that. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me, Hersh. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Amanda.
And where's the best place for listeners to connect with you?
They can go to yesbrandbuilders.com, and everything is there that they might want to find out about me. My book's there. I mean, they can go to sellingthetruthbook.com if they're specifically interested in the book, but they could find out anything else, my podcasts, my appearances, my work at that site.
Awesome. I will link that in the show notes. And I do like to just give it back to the guest. Any final words of wisdom you want to share?
Don't be an asshole. No, I think that's good. I think that's really good. I mean, if anybody listens to that and takes that advice, I think that's probably the best advice that I could give.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Hersh.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Manders Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.